For months, the Boston Marathon bombings and subsequent search for the suspects were the biggest news stories anywhere. But even though the Tsarnaev brothers' names and faces are recognizable around the world, defense attorneys for the surviving suspect want his trial moved out of Boston. They argue Dzhokhar Tsarnaev can't receive a fair trial here because of the intensity of local media coverage. In just a moment, we'll hear from legal experts about the change of venue motion. But first, here's what people in downtown Boston had to say about it.
I don't really think they get a fair trial anywhere. What they did was bad no matter where you live.
If you take it out of the Boston area, you just maybe get a better chance of something that's a little bit more evenly keeled.
This is where it happened. Let's get the people who were affected be the ones to judge them.
Fair is a very difficult word because everybody has heard of what happened. So there is no such thing in most of the world of a fair trial for this young man.
This is where he defiled our city and did something that was so atrocious, and he deserves to be tried by the people that he hurt the most.
We've gone through enough. The marathon was such a big deal this year. I think moving it out of the city will help, help us to move on.
You'd have to get somebody from another planet who didn't know about the marathon bombing.
Well, my next guest is a familiar face at the Moakley Federal Courthouse. David Frank is an attorney and a reporter for Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. Welcome back to Greater Boston. So they waited to the last minute. Even you were there all day today. They hadn't filed this motion yet. But what's the substance of the argument?
Well, what the defense is going to say is that in order to give their client Tsarnaev a fair trial, they can't do it in Massachusetts. What they're going to argue is that there's just no way to assemble a fair jury in this community. And the name of the game is obviously not finding people who haven't heard about the case. It's finding people who can fairly and impartially decide guilt or innocence. And you heard even in your introductory clip that there are some people out there who I think are having trouble with that concept. And that's one of the reasons that you would see a lawyer move for a change of venue.
Yeah, because they believe that the people who were harmed the most should be judging him. That's really not the way it's supposed to work. But we saw this with Timothy McVeigh. He was the Oklahoma City bomber. They moved his trial to Denver. I mean, in the end, did it make any difference?
Well, I mean, you could certainly say it did, in that at a minimum they were able to have an easier time finding a fair jury, because that really is the idea. But what I'd say, I mean, we know that this motion is coming, and we know that the judge is going to have to make a decision. But regardless of what's decided in this summer as far as changing a venue, this is an issue that's going to be a live issue all the way up through jury selection. Because even if the judge were to deny the motion now, which I think he will, the lawyers are going to renew that motion when they start impaneling. So we're going to be talking about change of venue for probably most of 2014.
Oh, gosh. All right, let's bring Julianne Bolero into the discussion. She's a criminal defense attorney and a partner at the Boston law firm Nelson Mullins Riley in Scarborough. Is this kind of a pro forma motion, Julianne, or is it something that really is necessary in this case?
Well, it's not pro forma. Defense counsel really do have to file the motion, but they do have an uphill climb. Where are they going to move the trial, as David said, where there won't be publicity? But, to Boston, the Boston Marathon is a signature event. This was personal to a lot of people, as we saw in that clip. So even moving it out to Springfield, perhaps, might help the judge get a jury that he can impanel as fair and impartial. As David said, the process is going to play itself out, and if the judge is unable to assemble sufficient number of impartial jurors, they're going to have to do something.
The prosecution did show its hand today on a couple of issues. One of this was they were going after him for betrayal of the United States, for failure to act upon his intention to become a naturalized citizen. Well, the judge just summarily dismissed that, right?
Well, no, what happened is that came up twice today. One way it came up is that that's one of the things the government wants to argue in support of death. If Tsarnaev were to be found guilty of the underlying crimes, there'd be this phase 2 punishment trial. And what the judge said is it's unnecessary, given all the other theories of guilt that you, the government, are pursuing against Tsarnaev. But really, one of the other ways that came up today, and one of the interesting things that happened in the courtroom, is this fight over discovery. Because what the government is saying is that we know from earlier court proceedings that Tsarnaev is going to try to present explanations as to why this may have happened, or at least try to present information about his background. And what the government is saying is that if we're pursuing our theories, we need to know who the defense is going to be calling as experts. We need to know more about what the defense's case is going to be. And it's really kind of an interesting issue right now because it's the judge having to balance the government's right to have some notice of what's coming against the defendant's right to not essentially have to incriminate himself or present information to the other side.
I don't know how close you were following this today, but it was like, I mean, part of me wanted to go, what? They said he's in defiance of the, what is it called, the Prison Litigation Reform Act. What does this mean? He can't get free representation because he's in violation of some federal prison reform act? He probably doesn't even know what it is. I mean, maybe his lawyers do, but...
Well, I know. I mean, these cases really do get very technical. I think there's enough drama surrounding the case that added drama is really unnecessary, and I agree with the judge 100% on that. But the case will go to trial. He will have appointed counsel. It may be moved from the city of Boston, but they are going to have problems in paneling wherever they impanel, and they're just going to have to get through it like they do in every other case.
Do you think it'll happen as soon as November? Because that seems like...
Well, I know the judge wants to keep the heat on. Given all of these unanswered questions, I think it may not get started in November, but the judge isn't going to tip his hand on that.
Did they also argue today, David, about some of those severe restrictions that are put on Tsarnaev, mail and visitors and all that? Did they go back at that, the so-called SAMS measures?
They did, and that's why I sort of disagree with your premise earlier. There wasn't any discussion about his counsel. It was in that context of the lawyers arguing to the judge that they can't really have private conversations with their client. What the issue right now, and it's complicated, so I'll be quick. The issue is in order for the defense to prepare their case, they've argued and they've convinced the judge that they need to have some meetings with Tsarnaev and his sisters. And so what the judge has said is that there are times, if the lawyers are present, where a meeting between Tsarnaev, his sisters, and the lawyers will be considered a legal visit. The question then becomes, does the FBI have the right to be there? And what the judge said is, yes, they do, but there has to be a firewall in place, that the FBI agents that are present in the room can't have anything to do with the prosecution. That's a pretty, I mean, it's not that unusual, but it's a pretty difficult position for the defense to be in, because how are you supposed to have candid conversations with the client? And that's the tricky part.
Also seems unnecessary. All right, Julianne Bolero, great to have you. David Frank, as always.